Hello everybody and welcome to this safety systems tutorial for all trains in Train Sim World. We're going to start this video by looking at AWS and DSD Vigilance, and we're going to do that here at Battersea Park on the approach to London Victoria on the Brighton Main Line. But the AWS concepts you'll see here apply to most British routes except for the Bakerloo line, Northern Trans-Pennine and Spirit of Steam. Let's enter the cab and turn the HUD on. The first thing we're going to do is activate AWS and Vigilance. We could do this by manually turning the switch on in the cab, but as these switches have different placements across all the different types of trains, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut instead. The keyboard shortcut for AWS is Control Enter, and for DSD Vigilance is Shift Enter. Now I can turn the train on as normal, starting with the master key and the reverser to the forwards position. You'll now hear the AWS warning horn going off. I'll cancel this with the AWS reset button, or Q, and the sunflower will illuminate, as you can see. Now let's take power. The idea of AWS is to provide a warning system for drivers to inform them that they are approaching a signal that is potentially at danger. It does this by energizing electromagnets like the one we're passing over now that tell an onboard computer whether the signal is green or anything else. When the signal is green, the driver hears a ding sound like the one we just heard, and the AWS sunflower stops illuminating. When the signal is yellow like this, the AWS will sound the warning horn, and if this is not acknowledged by the driver, the emergency brakes will apply as such. When the AWS is acknowledged, the sunflower illuminates and remains illuminated until you pass a signal that is green. To reset from this emergency brake, we'll put the train into full service application, put it into neutral, back into forwards, and we'll turn the AWS off and back on again. Get the same self-test, and then we can draw power again. So that knowledge, we can now acknowledge the AWS warning horn before we get the emergency brake application. So this ramp here will give us a warning horn, which I'll acknowledge, and the sunflower illuminates. You will receive a warning horn whether you're passing a signal that's red, single yellow, or double yellow. You could also get a warning horn if you're passing an upcoming speed restriction, which are found on the yellow triangular speedboard signs. Vigilance is a separate system that ensures the driver is alert. It does this by having a timer that is reset every time the driver makes an application of the throttle or the brake or any other of the key vital controls. If no such application is made, a separate warning tone sounds, and the driver has to respond to this by lifting and depressing a foot pedal. You can also do this by pressing Q. We'll now come to a stop here at London Victoria. A quick note on TPWS as well. TPWS should not interfere with your driving, and if it does, you'll know because the TPWS lights will come on. When this happens, an emergency brake application will be applied, and it will only happen if you've done something wrong. And in this game, generally that means you will have gone past a signal at danger, which will take you to the game over screen anyway. That's a brief overview of AWS and TPWS and the Vigilance system known as DSD. We are now going to look at the signalling systems that are endemic to Southeastern, Highspeed and LGV Mediterranean. Specifically, we're going to look at TVM 430 and KVB. We'll first enter the cab. To activate TVM 430 and KVB, along with all of the other safety equipment associated with them, we're going to use the same keyboard shortcuts as before. Control Enter and Shift Enter. Next, we can set up the train as we would normally. Regardless of where we are on this section of the line, we still need to perform the AWS self-test. You do not need to do this in the TGV duplex. We can now take power, remembering to complete our circuit by setting the appropriate power mode. So I'll take power now. And the first thing that you'll immediately notice is the TVM display, taking pride of position on the driver's desk. It will display a number with varying background colours. At the moment, it is a white 100 with black background. This means that the speed limit over this section is 100 and we cannot exceed that speed. In a moment, that number will jump up to 225 on a green background. This means that the line speed, the maximum permitted speed, is 225 and we are cleared to proceed at that speed. The reason why there was no green background over the 100 was because that was not the maximum speed. However, that was the maximum speed we could travel at due to the points that had a limited speed. So black background on white letters means the speed is not maximum line speed, but you still cannot exceed it. Okay, now the 225 is flashing. This means we have to expect the speed restriction to reduce at the next signal block. The signal blocks, by the way, are denoted by the blue squares with yellow triangles, like that one we just passed. So now we've gone from flashing at 225 to flashing at 200 with white diamonds. This means that from the next signal block, the speed limit enforced will be 200. And now we got flashing 160, which is telling us that the speed restriction at the next signal will be 160. It's still flashing, and the flashing means that we still need to expect a lower speed limit ahead. We've now got 130, which means from the next block we need to expect 130 and so on. So for all intents and purposes, TVM 430 is very easy to drive with. All you've got to do is drive at the speed that the display is telling you to. Remembering that if it starts to flash, you should begin to slow down. I'm going to come off the power now because I know that there is an 80 km/h limit coming into St Pancras International to begin with. And as well, I'll give you a demonstration on Vigilance, as we weren't able to in the previous segment in the Class 377. So you can see there that our TVM has gone to 80 in solid backgrounds. This means that we do not expect a speed restriction ahead, but an 80 km/h limit will be enforced from the next signal block, which is this one. So now we've gone to 80 in white letters over the black, and that means that we can't exceed that. That is the enforced limit. We also get an AWS self-test on arrival into St Pancras, regardless of the signal aspect, but you can ignore that, it means nothing. We're now switching from cab signalling to line side signalling, and now we switch to KVB control. Now KVB is also very easy to drive with. All you've got to do is follow the speed limits that are by the side of the track. If you start to speed, or if you're not slowing down enough, then it will enforce an emergency brake application. We still have the usual green, double yellow, single yellow, red aspects as we would anywhere else on the British network. However, they are not protected by AWS, they are protected by KVB. So as you saw there, the only thing you need to do when coming in and out of St Pancras when you've got KVB turned on is just to obey the speed limit. And if there's a red signal, you should get on top of slowing down for that speed limit well in advance. We're now approaching St Pancras. If you approach the buffer stops too quickly, the train will enforce an emergency brake application. And there we are. Okay, we are now in Switzerland on the Luzerne to Sursee route, and we're going to have a look at ETCS now, and that stands for European Train Control System. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to jump in the cab, we'll have the HUD on for this one, and we're going to come over to this function display on the right hand side, and we're going to turn it on, the ETCS on, by pressing 0. Next, we're going to put the master switch on, set the train up as normal. And now we've got this ETCS lamp that's lit up, and we got a warning tone. We're going to acknowledge that by pressing Q, and now ETCS lamp remains on, but the warning tone does not. We can now drive the train normally, but ETCS now being on is imposing a 40 km/h speed limit until we get past the next Balises. Now the Balises are these yellow things on the track, and they're by every signal and speed restriction. So it's imposing a speed limit of 40 because the system doesn't know what the current speed is. So now I've gone past that, you can see that the blip by the side of the HUD there has jumped up because we know what the line speed is. And over here on our ETCS display, we can see this red notch is the same blip as we can see this blue bug on the outside of the HUD. Now, as we approach Luzerne, we should see that the speed limits start to reduce, which will give an opportunity to demonstrate how ETCS will function. So ETCS follows a brake curve, so as we approach a speed restriction, we'll hear a distinctive tone, and then the bug, so that the red bug on this display and the blue and white bug on the outside of our HUD will smoothly scroll around, instead of, say, on TVM, which we've already seen, where it jumps straight to the next speed restriction. So you'll see when we come up to this 60, this red notch will slowly move down, and then it'll go and sit next to 60. Now, once you've gone past the first signal, so you hear there those two beeps, that tells us that we need to expect a reduction. So I'll start by going with some brake, and then you'll see that bug start to move on the HUD. And you'll also see on our display up here, the white bug has now moved down to 60 as well. So now sitting at 60. Sorry, this red bug has nothing to do with it. That's the speed set. It's this white bug. So that you can see now that it's jumped up to 80, the white bug. So you can move our pink speed set bug back up. So it's very simple to follow. You just got to keep your ears open. And when you hear two beeps, you got to expect a reduction. And then when this white blip on the outside and the grey sort of line round, or the blue and white blip on the side of the HUD start to lower, you've just got to stay below that. If you exceed that, which I'll demonstrate coming up to this 40, then it'll make a different noise, and if you exceed it by a lot, you'll get an emergency brake application. So you can hear there our brake, and then that da-da, da-da noise, which means that we're overspeeding. And the because we're overspeeding by a lot, the speedo has gone red, which means we're in an emergency brake application. Now to recover from this, going to pull the power off, and we can get moving again. Just got to wait for the air brakes to release, and then we can move. So driving with ETCS, as long as you're on top of your speeds, there's nothing to acknowledge. Just got to be mindful of any signals that are coming up and speed restrictions, and you won't get penalised. So I'll just come in for our stop here at Luzerne. Right, and we'll go for some brakes now. Now there's no buffer protection here, so ETCS will not bring you to a stand before buffer stops. You've still got to do that yourself. And that's how ETCS works. Okay, we're now on the PZB part of this tutorial. PZB is widely used throughout Germany and is fitted to every German route we have in the game. And it's quite a complicated system, so I'm just going to go over the brief functions of it. So before we even get started, I'm going to say that I'm only going to use the keyboard shortcuts for PZB. The keyboard shortcuts are page down, end, and delete. But you're only really going to need page down and end for most of them. So we're going to start by jumping into the cab. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn PZB on with Control Enter. And you can see PZB is now unisolated. We can now set up the train as normal. And we can now see that this 85 lamp has appeared on the dash and also on the HUD. This is because we're in passenger mode. If we were in a light freight train, then we'd have the 70, and if we're in a heavy freight train, we'd have the 55. Now these speeds are the speeds we have to come down to if we get a signal that we have to acknowledge. So the other things that we need to do we need to keep in mind is the 1000 Hertz lamp and the 500 Hertz lamp. Okay. So we'll start by taking, put the lights on, and we'll take power. So when we start to move, you'll see that the 85 and 70 lights start to flash. This means that we're under sort of like a start supervision mode, similar to ETCS, and we absolutely cannot exceed 45 kilometers an hour. And it's a good rule of thumb to stay 5 kilometers an hour under any PZB marked speed. To release from this 45 kilometer an hour limit, if you're sure that your signals are green and whatever, which they are, then what we can do is we can press end on the keyboard, which is our PZB release. You hear a buzzer, and we now go straight to 85. And that means there are no restrictions, and we can accelerate up to line speed. Now you'll see here, this signal is completely green. This means that there's nothing to do. We can sail straight past it. We only need to acknowledge is a page down, by the way. We only need to acknowledge if there's a signal that is yellow or has a speed restriction attached to it. So that's if it's yellow or has a yellow number. Alright, so any part of the signal is yellow or any part of the signal is red. The only signal that you can pass without acknowledging is something that's all green or all white or a mix of the two. So we can come up to line speed, which is 130. We're on the fast lines into Munich. Now, PZB, unlike AWS, does not warn you of what signals you need to acknowledge. You need to proactively be looking at every signal to check that you don't need to acknowledge it. So AWS, if you go past a signal that you need to acknowledge, it will sound an audible warning. PZB doesn't do that. So you've only got your own wits to tell you when to acknowledge. And for that reason, if at any point you're unsure, or you go past a signal and you didn't see what the signal was, it's always an option just to acknowledge every signal. There's no punishment if you acknowledge a signal. I can press PZB acknowledge now and it doesn't do anything. It only starts to work if you go past a signal that needs to be acknowledged. You also need to acknowledge upcoming speed restrictions. So if they're mounted by the side of the track, say, of the upcoming speed restriction, basically if there's a sign by the side of the track with one of those yellow magnets, so that the PZB magnets, speaking of which, there was a PZB magnet, and I needed to acknowledge that, but I didn't. So you can see now that we got the S, which stands for Zwangsbremsung, which means emergency brake, and the flashing 1000 Hertz magnet. And I didn't acknowledge that, so we got an emergency brake. And you'll notice that there was absolutely no warning. So to recover from this, I need to press PZB release, and then we're going to be imposed under the flashing 85, 70, and 1000 Hertz. Now this means that we cannot exceed 45 kilometers an hour whenever these two lights are flashing. So just to complete what I was saying, this here is a PZB magnet. They're found on the approach to most signals and at the signals. So you can see this one has a magnet next to it. Now, if you see one of these by the side of the track and there's no signal, but there is a sign like this, you also have to press PZB acknowledge, because chances are it's protecting this. And as I said, there's no punishment for acknowledging something that doesn't need to be acknowledged, but there is a very harsh punishment for not acknowledging something that does need to be acknowledged. So unlike the start program, because we were in an emergency brake, we cannot just leave this 45 kilometer an hour supervision mode. We have to remain under it. So I can press PZB release, and it's only letting us move because there's been a certain amount of time that's passed. So here you can see this signal is green over yellow, which means you have to expect an adverse signal ahead. So I'm going to press acknowledge, and you'll see now that the 1000 Hertz magnet has illuminated. This means that if we were above 85 kilometers an hour, we'd have to reduce our speed to 85 kilometers an hour. But you'll also notice that we've got this flashing 85, 70, which means you have to stay below 45 still. And that's because the magnet was also protecting that 40 kilometer an hour upcoming speed restriction sign. So you can now see that we got a flashing 85. When it's just the 85 that's flashing, you can press PZB release, but we still got our 1000 Hertz magnet. So because they're not flashing now, PZB will only give us an emergency brake if we go above 85, but because the line speed is 40, we're not going to do that. So you can now see that the 1000 Hertz light has stopped illuminating, so now we can press PZB release, and PZB is no longer monitoring our speed. So we've got no restrictions, and we can go up to 160, and we won't get an emergency brake. So it's quite a complicated system. It takes a lot of time to get your head around, and truth be told, I still don't properly understand it with so much fluency. But you know, if you practice it, you'll get better at using it. And so yeah, that's sort of the big thing, is just drive with it, and you'll be fine. And again, the biggest thing is, if you're not sure what to acknowledge, just acknowledge everything. And the key takeaway, if the 1000 Hertz light comes on, you've got to reduce to below the speed shown on the blue lamps. If the 1000 Hertz light goes out and this starts flashing, you can press release and go up to normal line speed. If the 85 and the 70 are flashing on, regardless of, so you could have been 55 and the 85 and 70 start flashing, it doesn't matter what mode you're on. If the 85 and the 70 are flashing, you have to get below 45. Also, if you're approaching a red signal, you have this 500 hertz magnet will 500 hertz lamp will light up, and you have to stay below 45 kilometers an hour. So if you're approaching a red signal, you've got to be aware of that, because if you're above 45, I think it's actually 65, but you've got to get below 45. If you're above 45, there's a fair chance you'll cop an emergency brake application, and that could add a lot of delay to your service. And that's how to drive with PZB in a nutshell. We're now on the LZB portion of this tutorial. We're here in an ICE, and we're outside Munich again, and I'm going to show you how to drive under LZB control. So, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to jump in the cab. Now, the reason why we're in an ICE is because the setup is slightly different to that of a other train, but only in one small difference, and I'll explain that to you in a moment. So the first thing we're going to do is going to go Control Enter for PZB and LZB, and then we're going to come over here to AFB. Now I'm going to press AFB V Sol Freigabe, and that means that this AFB controller is now our speed cruise control kind of setup. So now set that to forward, and now we can see that both the B and U lights are illuminated. B means that LZB is active and is looking out for track signals, and as soon as we get over a portion of track with this wire running down the middle in German routes, the U light will come on, and that means that PZB is active. You can also see in the center of the display and also on the HUD, we've got this column. Now this column is telling us that in between 3 and 4,000 meters, so between 3 and 4 kilometers away, there's a speed restriction. And that is in essence what LZB is telling us. It is telling us the state of the signals and the speed restrictions well in advance of what we can see. Now the reason why I've turned AFB on is because on trains that are fitted with AFB, when you have AFB turned on at the same time as LZB, the train will drive itself. So to demonstrate this, we'll release our brakes and we'll go for some power. Now when you're under LZB mode, you can set the AFB all the way to the top, and it will only drive at what PZB is telling it. If your train does not have AFB, then you'll have to just watch the speeds manually, just as though you were driving with ETCS. So you'll just have to watch for the this diamond on the side of the screen that's now moved up. You'll just need to make sure that your speed is below that, because if you go over, you'll get an emergency brake application. You can now start to see that this column here this column will start to get smaller. The lights in the middle will start to shorten, as you can see there, and that means that we're just approaching that speed restriction, and that speed restriction is speed restriction coming into our terminus station for this run. So you'll see when the speed jumps up to 100 in a moment, you'll see both on the HUD and on here, they also jump up to 100, and the train is driving itself, and it will automatically set the speed up to there. If you don't have AFB, you'll need to watch that yourself, because the train won't be driving itself. See, once the back of the train passes, we can go up to 100. Now this makes driving with LZB really easy. It drives itself if you've got AFB and it's turned on, or if it's not, then you just have to stay below the marker. Now you'll see this G light has illuminated, and that's also repeated on the HUD, and that means that we're approaching a speed restriction, or a point where we're going to have to start to brake. Now the train will do that itself because you've got AFB, but again, if you don't have that, then you'll need to do that yourself. And in a moment we'll see this red bug and the blue and white bug on the HUD. They start to creep back, and that is as we're approaching the stop signal at the end of this run that I've programmed in. So you can see that the AFB is at the same rate as the bug, so the train is literally driving itself, but if you didn't have AFB, you'd need to make sure that you're below that speed. So you can see here it's literally telling you what to do, and even though this signal here has a yellow aspect on it, we do not need to acknowledge that on PZB. We don't need to do anything on PZB. So we're approaching this red signal up above, and the train is now coming nicely to a stop, and it will stop itself before that signal. Now, if this signal were to clear after we'd stopped, you would need to then put the throttle back to neutral, back to 0. Also, this works with the throttle off, by the way. You don't need the throttle on. So if this signal were to clear after we'd stopped, LZB would jump up, but you'd still need to apply power again. So you need to reset the power controller and then apply power again. Quickly as well, when you're at the end of an LZB supervised section, a flashing yellow lamp will appear both on the HUD and on the dash, and it will say END, E-N-D-E. And when that happens, you've got to press PZB release or end on the keyboard, and then that flashing end light will turn solid, and that is fine. You don't need to do anything else. Then once you transition from LZB to PZB, when the LZB supervision ends, you have to throttle back to neutral, pull your AFB back to 0, and then set it back to the desired speed that you've now got. Because the train's not driving itself, you've got to actually use AFB to hold the line speed, and then you can take power again. So that's how you drive with LZB. We're now on to the ACSES ATC portion of this tutorial. Now that stands for American Civil Speed Enforcement System and Automatic Train Control. Now they're two different systems, but they work together across Boston Sprinter and the Metro North Railroad route. ATC is also found on the Long Island Railroad route, but not ACSES. So ACSES monitors line speed and relays that to the cab. If we hop into the cab, we can see this is our display here. So you can see when ACSES is controlling, we'll have ACSES here and a number here, and that will be our maximum speed. When ATC is controlling, and it will only control when we're going past a signal that isn't clear, then we'll start to see one of these numbers or letters up here illuminate, and we'll then get a reduced speed. So ACSES is monitoring for the maximum line speed and is making sure we're below that, or we're prepared to slow for an upcoming speed restriction. And ATC is making sure that we're going the correct speed for the signals. So to turn them on, we're going to press Control Enter. And now we can set up the train as we would normally. Okay, and we'll set that to forward. Forward there. Now we can see the cab signal aspect is restrict because it does not know what the next signal is saying. So because of that, ATC is imposing a maximum speed of 20 miles an hour. And in the US, all of the signal aspects have different names. So here, these colours are repeating what we should see on the signals, and then it gives its associated name. I'll also show you how to use the speed controller, if I can remember how. It's not there. Is it here? No. Function settings. Yes, here we go. Or not. No. Where is it? Oh, okay, I won't show you how to use the speed set. There is a function for it, but... Oh no, it's these two, but you have to get moving. Okay, I will show you how to use it. So we'll start by getting the brakes to release, and we'll cut our brakes in. That's fine, and we'll get some lights as well. So when our brake cylinders are fully released, we can apply some power. Okay, so you can see now that we've got cruise on and cruise off that have appeared. So when we get to 20, we'll set cruise on. I'll just come back to 20, and I'll set cruise on. And now we go past this signal, and ATC should increase. It can be a bit temperamental. It's quite bugged on this route, it has to be said. But we should get a much higher speed. So you can see these beacons on the track, they transmit the ATC and ACSES data. I think I picked the worst service for this. It's decided to be buggy. What I'll do is I'll turn ATC off, and now we can see that ACSES is giving us a maximum speed of 120. So I will accelerate up to that. And it's really quite simple to follow, especially on this route. You've just got to stay at or below that speed shown on there, or on Metro North or Long Island Railroad. You've just got to stay below the speed that's illuminated. And they're also matching blips on the HUD to make your life a bit easier. Now, if you find yourself over the speed, because unlike LZB or ETCS, the bugs don't move smoothly. If you're going from 120 to a 60, it'll just jump straight down to 60. In that circumstance, you've got to throw your brake into the suppression position. And in this train, that is 66%. But in other trains, it doesn't have to be. So now got clear, so you can turn ATC back on again, and you'll see that that's all fine. So that was just being temperamental, a bug in the route, which is quite common on this route, unfortunately. But that's gone up to clear 125, which means we can go at 125, and you can see the cab signal aspect is green, which is mimicking what we have. ACSES is still telling us that the maximum permitted speed is 120, which is all that we can do. But you can see here, we're coming up on a yellow signal. So we're going to go past that, and we should see some interesting stuff happening. And we're also coming up on a 115. So ACSES is now giving us a 45, so we're going to jump to suppression braking now, and we won't get an emergency brake as long as we get below that speed as quickly as possible. So as I said there, we don't have any kind of jump down, and you can see ATC is taking control because we went past that approach medium signal, the yellow one, and it's giving us a limit of 45 associated with that. So you also saw when I was braking, the system, I had to reset the system twice. The first time, if I just turn cruise on there, the first time it was because the speed limit jumped down, and so you need to acknowledge that regardless of whether you're above it or below it, and you just press Q to acknowledge that. And the second time it was because I'd taken quite a while. So you can see there, because the speed limit jumped down and we switched to ACSES, it started to flash, so you had to acknowledge that. Now the second time that started beeping was because I hadn't reached the 45 within a certain amount of time. So if I wasn't in suppression braking by that point, it would have been an emergency brake application. But because I was in suppression, that was avoided. So the other thing, unlike LZB, these two systems won't wait for the back of the train to pass the speed limit. So you saw there, whilst we're going through the turnouts, as soon as the loco passed through, the speed jumped up, even though the back of the train still hadn't passed through. So now back up to 120 at clear. And there's nothing to worry about. So basically, as long as you drive at the speed that's shown, press Q when anything beeps at you or flashes, and go into suppression braking if you're over the speed on this, you'll be fine. And then the other thing, on this train, the cruise control, you control with these buttons on that display. So you'll see there, ATC is now asking us to come back down to 45, and it started beeping and flashing. I've thrown the train into suppression after cancelling that those beeps. And you'll hear again in a moment, we'll start to get some more beeps and more flashes. But because we're in suppression, as you can see here, there's no time to penalty. If I pulled out of there, you'd see a penalty eventually. But we'll stick it back into suppression. Now on every other train than this, suppression is maximum service brake. So I've come off there and we'll go cruise control, except we won't because that's now coming down to 30. So if I don't have put it in suppression, you'll see in a moment, well, we should get some more beeps if we're not down to the speed in a certain amount of time. Or maybe we won't. Again, the system is very temperamental. A lot of the time it won't work exactly as intended. Or it might be, it might jump around in front of you. But on the whole, you can drive with it. Unfortunately, if you do have it turned on, certainly on this route, you could end up being really quite late. One other thing, on Metro North, the Metro North New Haven line, I would highly recommend driving with this on, because the signalling system on that route does not, there's no absolute block. So if you didn't have the system turned on and you're driving at line speed, you could crash into the back of another train, and that's the job of ATC, is it knows where the trains are, so it will allow you literally to drive right up to the back of the train in front, as long as you're not exceeding 15 miles an hour. So now coming down to 20. And we'll turn cruise off. And back on again. And so you can see now we're on a restrict which means that we're at the most restrictive. It depends what train you're on the Long Island Railroad, and Metro North restricting is 15 miles an hour. So that's what I was talking about, the 15. But yeah, so in a nutshell, as long as you stay below that speed, use suppression braking and press Q whenever anything's beeping at you or flashing, you'll be fine. Okay, we're now coming around the curve to approach Boston Back Bay, where we will stop, and that will be the end of this tutorial. So CIFA and the alerter and the DSD, all of those vigilance systems, once you turn them on, basically, if something beeps at you, press Q. They're very simple to understand, and I think I've covered that in my DSD topic with the class 377. So now going to apply some brakes now to come to a stop. And there we are. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you've gotten something out of it. If there's something else that you need help with, I'll be happy to offer assistance. You can hop onto you can leave a comment, you can hop onto Discord, you can email me, and I will endeavour to respond in a timely manner with a solution to your query. If you'd like me to make a video addressing something major, or if lots of you have the same problem, I will make a follow-up. And yeah, so I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Have a nice day, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.